When it's all said and done and somebody else is looking back on our life, what is the legacy that we're leaving behind? What are they going to say about our time on this earth? That's what we're talking about today, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Coloring Through the Bible. My name is Keegan Harkins, and today we're talking about how people see us. And now normally I wouldn't even want to talk about this subject. I think that we shouldn't care what other people say. We shouldn't care what other people think, as long as we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But, I mean, let's just be honest. Let's just be real. We are put on this earth to impact the lives of other people. We all have a calling. We were all designed for a specific purpose. Before the beginning of the world, God said, in 1977, I think that's a good time for Keegan to be born. And I'm going to give her this experience and that experience to prepare her for what I want her to do in 2017, in 2018, in 2024. So he knew I was coming, and he knew you were coming. And he set the scene, and he prepared the world for you. But when we're gone, what impact are we going to have made? I mean, that's the whole reason why we're here, right? We all have an individual calling. Some of us are called to be teachers. Some of us are called to be business owners. Some of us are called to be a good neighbor, or the person who prays for other people, or the person who reaches out and cooks meals for people who are going through a tragedy, or whatever calling God has called you to do. He's given you exactly the tools that you need to make. But then we all have one universal calling. When Jesus, rose from the dead and he was getting ready to ascend to heaven, he told his disciples, and we're his disciples, if we are following after Jesus, if we are learning from Jesus and molding our lives to mimic his life, then we're his disciple. We always think of there just being 12 disciples. Those are the main 12 disciples. But there were hundreds of people who followed Jesus, thousands of people who followed Jesus around from place to place. And there have been millions and millions of his disciples through the ages. And we are disciples of Jesus because we're trying to live by his teachings. And so we have been given the Great Commission. We've been given a command by our teacher to go and spread the gospel, to tell people about God's love, to tell people about the salvation that came through the cross. That's our calling universally. Now, how we do it changes from person to person, but we all have a purpose here on this earth. And when we're not here anymore, will we have left the world different than when we came? I hope so, because otherwise I kind of feel like we're just wasting our time. If we're not changing something, if we're not bringing light into this world, if we're not setting off a chain reaction in even just one person's life, then we're kind of just wasting our calling on selfishness. It's not always easy to do what God tells us to do. And he tells us what to do in his word. He tells us how we're supposed to live. Just the fact that we walk in love, the fact that we make that decision to do what's right, to follow God's word, to live our lives separated from the things of the flesh. The Bible tells us that if we are children of the light, if we are followers of Jesus, if we are children of God, we're going to walk in love. We're going to turn away from temptations. We're going to resist sin. We're going to live our life differently, and that makes an impact. That changes the world. Maybe we don't think that our life is all that important, but it is. Maybe we don't think that we're doing much good in our day-to-day life, our little life. How could it possibly be that big of a deal? But it is. Any life that chooses to walk in love, that chooses to follow God's example that he gives us in his word, to turn away from gossip and slander and evil talk and hate, any life that chooses to be different than the way that the world lives is going to change the world. Maybe you're not going to see thousands and millions of people give their lives to the Lord because you stood up and said something. But maybe your love is going to inspire somebody else to walk in love. Maybe your resistance to gossip, maybe you saying, hey, I'm not going to participate in this. We shouldn't be talking about this person. Instead of talking about this person, how about we go to that person and see if they need help? How about we offer love to that person instead of sitting here gossiping? That person that has the strength and the courage to say that, to do that, to be different, they're going to impact the lives of those people who were sitting around gossiping. We make an impact in our lives. When Noah lived and then he was no more, his story is written down in the Bible. Now, I would venture to say most of us are not going to have books written about us or stories about us put in a book that is read by millions of people, but we still leave a legacy. You know what Noah's legacy was? It wasn't this big boat that he built, although that was pretty cool. His legacy is found in Genesis 6:22 and Genesis 7:5, where it says that Noah did everything the Lord told him to do. And before that, I think it was his great-grandfather, Enoch, his legacy, we don't know anything about his life. But you know what we do know? It says Enoch walked with the Lord. He lived his life, even though the world at that time was corrupt, it was full of violence, it was full of hatred, it was full of people turning their back on God. Guess what? Our world is full of violence. It is full of hatred. It is full of people turning their back on God. But Enoch and Noah and you and me, we can choose to live our life doing what God tells us to do. We can walk with the Lord even if people ridicule us for it, even if they don't understand, even if they hate us for it. I mean, that's why Jesus told us to love our enemies, to love and pray for those who persecute us. He knew that this wasn't an easy calling he was giving us all. There are going to be people who don't appreciate our walk of faith. And we need to respond in love because we have no idea what that love is going to do after we're gone. The first martyr of the new church, after Jesus ascended to heaven and the new church started preaching about salvation through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, they were not well received. And one man whose name was Stephen, he was killed. He was stoned to death for the message of Jesus Christ. But even as they were throwing rocks at his head, he was praying for them. He was asking the Lord to forgive him. He was showing them love, forgiveness, and mercy. Exactly what God told him to do. That's how Jesus told us to live our lives. And maybe we think that didn't make a difference, but you know what? Those men that were throwing those stones, they saw his love. And I know it made a difference. One of the men in that group, his name was Saul, and he would grow up and he would become Paul, the biggest preacher of the gospel to the Gentile world. We may never know the impact that just walking with the Lord and doing everything God tells us to do is going to make, but I just want to encourage you today that it's going to make an impact. We may never see it, but just believe it. That no matter where you are, no matter where God has placed you in this world, it was on purpose. Whether you are wealthy beyond belief or barely struggling to get by, none of that matters as long as you are walking in obedience to what God tells you to do. Because only when we are doing what God tells us to do are we going to super impact this world. So I just wanted to encourage you today. Think about how other people are going to see your life after you're not here. Are they going to say you were just a good person? Are they going to remember your talents and your gifts? What we should want them to remember is, did we walk with the Lord and do everything God told us to do? Because that's when we move mountains that never go back. I hope you guys have been encouraged. Have a truly blessed day until we see each other again. Love you guys. Take care.